Greetings, everyone. This is your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show I've been doing to celebrate the fact that we've just passed the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the entire hobby of role playing games, tabletop role playing games. And it's has been and continues to be a lot of fun as I bring on people who have worked on the game, many of whom I worked alongside, and we talk about what it was like to get into gaming early on and to work on D&D and other tabletop role-playing games across this span of 50 years. And while I do that, I will be drawing, or I have been and will be drawing, a cartoon homage to a classic piece of D&D art. Each week, I'm taking a piece from another year along the 50-year timeline, and we're closing in on the end of that 50-year timeline. We're on the year 2022 this episode. Gotta slow down, man. I'm tripping over my words. It's too early in the hour for that to happen. Hello, Michael Pastor. Thank you for joining us. Anyway, that's what it's all about. Today, I'm very lucky and very happy to have as my guest uh, the creative director for Dungeons and Dragons. He's had a lot of different titles over the years, working on a lot of stuff. Um, when I first met him, he was a freelancer. But when I first worked alongside him, he was editor of Dungeon Magazine, and he's been responsible for a lot of things. If you're a D&D fan, a lot of things you've loved over the years. So I'm just going to bring him in, and we are going to chat about all that. It is none other than very my very own friend, Chris Perkins.
Hey, Stan.
Hello, Chris. You see, I'm so professional with those intros. You see, I'm good. I'm getting good
Amazing.
at this.
Mad skills,
53
man.
episodes in.
Woo.
Hamina, 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 hamina.
We have a special guest star in my
Hey,
lap. Is my dog Milo.
hello, Milo.
I don't know how
Milo.
long he'll stay there, but he's happy to be part of this experience.
How many titles has he had? Michael asks.
His current title is Morale Officer.
Oh, good. Well, you're well suited for that.
Yeah. he, he doesn't play Dungeons and Dragons, but he does play Dungeons and Dogs.
He puts up with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. Yes.
Merrick Blackman, thank you for joining us. See, every additional guest, everyone loves the. I told you, it's internet
Yes.
Andy. Everyone loves the animals.
Yes.
Um, so thank you for being here. Uh, like me, you've been involved in D&D for most of the 50 years, if not all of them. I don't know exactly
Yeah.
when it was you started. How did you start? Was D&D the first hobby game, what we can now call hobby games, that you were into?
Yes. I grew up in rural Canada, so there wasn't exactly a broad selection of options. But yeah, D&D was the first one discovered quite by accident. And it occurred to me today, Stan, thinking about coming on your show, that I have been at Wizards for exactly half my life.
Wow,
Isn't that weird?
that that is weird.
Yes. And then add another 10 years to that of freelancing work. But I discovered D&D when I was 10. How old were you when you found D&D?
I was uh 13.
Okay. Yeah, and
13.
I found it by total accident. Um, Next to our grocery store was what Canadians call a smoke shop, which is basically a small store where you can buy stamps, and there's like a little post office, and you can get porno magazines, or that kind of thing, wrapping paper. And I went in there with my mother, and I saw on a shelf right next to the porno rack a bunch of just sort of miscellaneous books, and the first edition Monster Manual was on there.
Nice,
Complete,
nice.
it felt completely out of place, but the art of the cover is what drew me.
Right.
I took it off the shelf and was just thumbing through it, and it was like $5 or $7. So I was so taken with the monster illustrations, I just laid down the cash and took that book home, and um, no idea that it was actually a game, really.
Right.
But as I started to pore over the illustrations and digest the stats for the various monsters, I tried to backward engineer what the game might be. And I started running little combats just between the monsters.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and so no idea how to play the game, just kind of discovering it organically. Um, but it wasn't until a couple months later that I actually found another book that sort of explained to me the fundamental nature of what D&D is, that there's this aspect of making characters, and that's that book
Yeah.
right right
There you
there.
go. There you go.
Whoop,
The
there.
blue book.
Yes, the blue book. That was the second book I bought. I was still 10, and it had just come out, and memorized it cover to cover.
Yeah. No, I love
Yeah.
that. It was my. So I've said on the show, I have it right here because I talk about it all the time. When I'd read about D&D, and I at summer camp, someone had run me through a game, but I didn't have anything. And when I went to look for it, it was just unavailable. But that was the year that adult coloring books were in all the
Right.
rage, and
Yes.
this was available, and it's got great art and a story written by Gary,
Uh-huh.
which gets you the proper feeling for what it is, and in the middle, a game, a little
Right. Yes, that famous map. Yeah.
yes, and so it's like a proto dungeon board game.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
does give you between that, it gave me a really good idea of what the game was supposed to be. So when I finally was able to get the blue book about 6 months later, I I actually had a really good idea what it should be, mostly.
Yeah. And now the art on the cover there is by David C. Sutherland, who is an old school D&D
Mm.
artist, going all the way back to the origins of TSR. Um, there's a funny story, and I don't know if you were at Wizards when we found the original painting.
I was right after my uh, the first of the two contracts I did there. Steve Winter was in that seat when I was there.
Yes, in the Wizards mail
Got it.
room, they were moving some furniture around, some shelves, and they found this wrapped up package that had fallen behind a cabinet. And when they unwrapped it, they realized it was the original framed David C. Sutherland full color painting of that cover. They don't know how long it had been sitting back there, but it must have been sitting there for as long. Uh, they must have taken it out of a TSR warehouse when Wizards bought D&D, and it just kind of got knocked out and lost in the shuffle. Well, in 2000 and I want to say 22, it was exhibited at the Smithsonian and given the price tag of $500,000.
Wow. Wow.
That's what its value was tagged at. I can only imagine that now, after the 50-year anniversary has ended, its price has inflated, and if you were to try to buy it now, it'd probably be close to $1 million.
There. I mean, there are a lot of funny stories about that. Steve Winter told me when they found it, and I wanted to see it, but I couldn't get in. When I when I came on my contract in 2016, I I asked you where it was, and we went hunting for it and couldn't find it. It had been hanging outside the CEO's office, but it no
That's
longer
right.
was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my very last day. Someone told me that it would been put in the storage area where they keep all the super rare uh, magic cards and all the very rare stuff, and that you couldn't get into there easily. But on my very last day there, uh, um, they pulled some strings and got me in there, and I got to have a private viewing. I have some photos of me just kind of holding it and staring at it lovingly. It was a great final thing on my final day.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's also. I mean, the people who've been watching this know that was the image that I did the homage for the year 1977,
That's
1978.
right. I think I have a copy of that here. I can just show people. So many good pieces you've
How
done here,
big was it,
Stan.
my glass? It's not big. It's only a. It's only. Oh,
Whoops, there it is.
there we go. Yeah, that's on the calendar.
Yep.
Calendar for this show. For those of you that missed the Kickstarter, sorry.
You got mad skills, Stan.
Oh, thank you. Um, yeah, no, it was. It's not very big. It's probably it might even be 8.5 by 11. It's a little, maybe a little
Yeah.
bigger than that, but
Yeah.
it's on artboard and or some kind of Bristol board, and
Makes me wonder how many original paintings are actually still lost and hiding out somewhere.
and the funny thing about that to me is, so they were finding storage lockers full of stuff every 6 months for years. There'd be a
Yeah.
new one that got uncovered. So either that one wasn't uncovered until 2010, or it had been discovered when you were in the old building and got shipped over and lost again when it fell
Yes.
behind whatever it fell behind.
Yeah, because Wizards has moved at least 3 times, changed facilities at least 3 times, so plenty of opportunity for stuff to get lost in transit.
And yeah, I talked to a few people that tell the story that when it was found, someone said that someone was like, "This, we should just throw this out. It's just a fan. Some fan sent this thing," and someone said, "You should take that upstairs. I have a feeling that might be something more than a fan painting."
Yeah. I remember fondly, I guess it was around 2012 or thereabouts, um, there was a big um, pile of TSR merchandise
Mm,
that came to the company in boxes and was basically distributed.
right.
Everybody basically got into a line and got when they got to their point, were able to take one thing and then go, and then you could go to the back of the line and get in line again until all the material was gone. There were like D&D sleeping bags, D&D candy, D&D Halloween costumes. There was old D&D modules and adventures and books and all kinds of crazy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
The,
was, and that
the
happened at
D,
least 2 or 3 times.
oh yeah. The D&D Shrinky Dinks were in there. I
Yes.
got a few different sticker sets that had been done.
Yeah. I got a set of those wonderful, and I know you love these too. The original monster cards, the four
Yeah.
sets, the
Yeah.
first edition monster cards with the Errol Otis art. Um, I ended up giving those to Stashwick, Todd Stashwick, because he's an old school collector of miscellaneous D&D stuff. But man, oh man, when I saw those, because I had lost some D&D product that I had bought when I was in my teens,
Yeah.
including those cards. So being able to find them again and replace them and keep them under my pillow for a while was nice.
I picked up. I had lost my copy of the Blue Book, and
Mm,
I was never. Occasionally, whole box sets would show up in those. I was never able to get a whole box set, but I managed to pick up a couple of copies of the Blue Book itself
yeah.
for my.
This blue book is like number 5 on my list of things to grab if my house catches fire. There's like the dog is number 1, the passport is number 2, the wallet is number 3. I don't remember number 4, and number 5 is this thing. I don't know why. It's
As well,
sentimental.
it should be. Let's see. Chris Andrews says it's an honor to talk to Mr. Perkins. Thank you for all your contributions. Kristen
Thank you.
Lawn says I met Stan at SpoCon in the early 2000s. Sounds about right. Good to see you again. Thank you for dropping in. Jeff Crook says hi. Torrin Atkinson is here and says hi. Weldon
Oh
Chen.
my God, Torin is here.
Yeah.
Goodness. Been years.
John says he managed to hold on to all the original art he did for TSR and WotC. Not that there was a ton of it.
Yeah. Torin and I did stuff on the magazines together.
Kristen says, I swear I met Chris Perkins at a convention in the past, RadCon or MissCon or SpoCon, maybe NorwestCon. Could have been.
Yeah.
Those are all relatively local, so we have a tendency to show up at those kinds of things. Steve Winter says those monster cards were one of my very early editing assignments. Condensing everything that much almost drove me to resign. All right, I'm going to. So I guess I'm going to pose a question, then I'm going to pop over and start do some drawing. So we know that's how you got started playing. Did you play through? Did you stick with it all the way through high school and college? Did gaming stay in your life, or did it drop out?
So I was actively playing D&D all through high school. When I got to college, it was a little bit trickier and the games kind of died out for a bit, but I was doing some writing during that time. So I had sort of transitioned from being a player into a freelancer wannabe, and then later freelancer. And because I couldn't get a college group together. And frankly, when you're in college, there are other things that you're discovering.
Yeah, happens in college and high school. And that's why so many people have
it didn't
that
so much.
as part
It
of
didn't
their.
happen so much in high school for me. It was mostly college. I had a pretty tame high school life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I paused my gaming in college. And then once I got out of college and I started my careers, I had a few before I actually went into gaming full time.
What were you doing?
Well, let me rhyme off the list of things I did before I became a Wizards employee. So I worked as a stock boy in a grocery store. I worked as a riveter in a factory making the walls and doors that you see in public bathrooms. Yes,
That's
it's
pretty
very,
specific.
very, yeah, right. Not many skills I learned there could cross over into role playing games. But then I made peanut butter in a factory. Which turned me off of peanut butter for about 10 years.
Wow.
But that was super fun because it was like factory was 130 degrees inside, and they were also working with sugar products. And so I'd go home every day coated in a quarter-inch thick coating of sugar. And then I cleaned up toxic waste, and that's how I got some of my superpowers.
You know what? A lot of things I knew about you, Chris, but I'm constantly discovering new ones. I did not know
Yeah.
about toxic waste.
Yes, yes. Wearing hazmat suits outside in the summer was super fun. And then I went on to work for the Canadian federal government as a translator. And then I got teaching jobs. I started to chart my path as a teacher. And it was when I was a teacher that I got hired by TSR/Wizards of the Coast. But teaching was great because I had my summers off and could just write like a maniac. And what I wrote were D&D adventures mostly, and some of which eventually got published. The really bad ones didn't, but the better ones did.
What kind of teaching? Were you public
I
school?
was I was in high school teaching English and mathematics.
Okay.
Very
Okay.
right brain.
So one of the things that people may not know about you, one of your superpowers, and you have many, is that you have the you're able to do print worthy lettering and map design just off the cuff. Is that something that you learned teaching, or is that or honed teaching, or did you just have
Oh,
that
that's a really
talent?
good question. So when I was a young kid, I D&D was a huge sort of artistic magnet for me. I would copy images that I saw in the books and like draw them on my binders in school and things like that. And then my mother saw me doing this, and she put me in a private art class with a teacher, an artist named Wendy Bicus, who basically ran this class out of her basement. And I did that for about 2 years because my mother thought, oh, maybe he'll become a really talented artist. Um, and then that didn't actually that helped me a lot. It gave me appreciation and discipline for fine art. But if my teaching career hadn't launched, I would have been an architect, Stan. I
Well, I don't
was
find that
big
hard.
into taking drafting classes, things like that. Now I find actually the drafting classes were terribly boring. It's like I don't, and very old school. There was no software that we were using. It was all hand drawn stuff. But I think the question about my handwriting is answered by the fact that when I was 4, before I entered kindergarten, my mother, who, she only had the one kid at the time, would just sit me down at night, every night, and make me write out the alphabet, print out the alphabet on sheets of lined paper. And if I was ever over on a line, she'd make me do the entire page again.
Whoa.
And this was she did this every day for God, it must have been 6 months. And so that's where my nice handwriting comes. I owe that to my mother. My sister did not receive that kind of training, by the way, which is why my sister's handwriting looks indecipherable.
Oh, it's always the first child that gets that kind of.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Well, I'd say another thing that I know is your, as I say, your facility with maps certainly comes partly out of that training.
I love maps. Yes.
Yeah. I was in.
Yeah.
We were just talking before we came on about the Arvaniar campaign, the third edition. What started out as a third edition playtest and turned into a 7-year, maybe not quite that long campaign.
Yeah.
But you used to do maps up on the whiteboards in Wizards.
That's right. For those who don't know, the Wizards building where we ran our game in the evenings, they had these scrolling whiteboards, and they had grids on them, some of them, and so I could go in, I could sneak into the conference room before the group showed up, draw a map on the whiteboard on the grid, and even do things like cross hatching and like really make it look awesome. And then I could scroll it to hide it until I was ready to reveal it during the game. And there was always, I think, a lot of anticipation to when I hit the scroll button and the map would sort of reveal itself, right, and you'd see where.
When we'd come in, very often there would be something on the board, and if there wasn't, there was an air of expectation. The whole waiting for the moment when you would hit the button, and it would,
yes,
and this map would be revealed for us.
And it would be like, it would be massive. It would be absolutely huge. And then I'd leave it there, and other people would tell me they didn't want to erase the whiteboards because they just like to gaze at the maps.
There are people that used to say they look forward to their Tuesday morning meetings because they knew that Monday evening we had been playing, and they wanted to see what map was on.
Yes, they had as much information about the campaign as some of you did. Some of our players did. Yeah.
And the other thing about those, besides that, when they worked fully, you could print off those boards. So.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. Yes. Yeah. The printer tech wasn't great. I mean, what it would crank out was kind of really
like fax,
like a really
fax
bad
machine
fax
quality. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was better than nothing.
No, let's say I still have some of those in a folder. I saved everything from that campaign. As I was telling you before the start, that is my perfect my example of the best campaign ever. And
yeah. Yeah, I joined Wizards a few years before third edition launched, and so I was very involved in the play testing, and it was, first of all, it was an honor just to play with you, Stan, and everybody else in that group. I mean, these were all wonderful, creative, hilarious people. that we got to hang out with every Monday. And
That
then
was, I mean, when you think about it, so Monty Cook was in the game. He didn't. He left after a while, about the same time he left the company, I think. But
yeah, and he was also gearing up to launch a campaign of his own, which
right,
I was a player in. Yeah,
and Jeff Quick is trying to put
yeah,
together uh, Dave Gross, who was editor of Dungeon at the time.
Dave
Pierce
Noonan, who
Waters,
was one of the writers, was a guest star.
yeah.
Um, Pierce Waters, who was our publishing director.
Um, Chris Thomason,
That's right. Yeah,
yeah. No, it's a lot of
Sean Reynolds.
Sean Reynolds. Sean Reynolds is Sean and Sean Blakeney.
That's right, and Sean Reynolds' sister,
Yeah,
uh,
Kerry Reynolds. Yeah.
Carrie Reynolds, was also in it. Yeah, so yeah, distinguished company. And then I continued that tradition with fourth edition. I had a fourth edition campaign that ran years before fourth edition released and continued until fourth edition's end. And we went all the way up to level 30 in that campaign. And it was two groups, a Monday group and a Wednesday group.
And I got to join that. I'd left. After I say I left Wizards after I was no longer had the honor of working at Wizards, then wound up going down to San Diego. When I came
Uh-huh.
back, you let me join the fourth edition campaign, which was also great. I will no way slight that by saying how much I loved Arvania.
Yeah. One of the fun challenges of the fourth edition campaign was having the two groups doing things in the world, and acknowledging that both groups were there. So if one group did something like kill a villain, that villain was dead in both games.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh, and so there wasn't as much crossover as I anticipated at the outset, but I think that's just because people's schedules made juggling players really, really difficult. Um, One of the other good things that came out of the fourth edition game that I wish I had done with the third edition game was I wrote a series of articles for the web called the Dungeon Master Experience, and
mm-hmm.
they were based on the fourth edition game. And it was my way to sort of unpack some of the things I do as a DM. Um, and I
Those
think
are
a lot
great
of people,
series. I mean,
yeah,
is that
a lot
is
of
that
people got a lot of value out of that.
is do you still have those anywhere?
I they're still actually, you can still track them down. They're not
It's
easy to find, but you can still do a Google search and they'll that will lead you to where they reside. But I did download them. Um, I actually have also the original Word files, the sort of unformatted original texts, and there was like just over 100 of those.
yeah. I remember those coming out when I was doing um,
Yeah,
my contract work.
yeah, yeah. And that was during the time when we were also working on the digital magazines, and Steve Winter was one of my co-conspirators on those at the time. I don't know where I found the time, frankly, but they were a lot of
You
fun.
I thought that about you for the entire time I've known you. I don't know where you find the time to create all the things you do.
Well, the good
I
news is,
do
Dan, I'm
remember.
slower and stupider than I used to be. So back then, I when I think back on it, I sort of marvel at the amount of stuff we were able to crank out.
I know that you didn't do. I mean, the Dungeon Master experience was clearly a fourth edition thing, but in
Yeah,
third edition time, there were a lot of Dungeon and Dragon editorials where what happened in our games would show up in the editorial as an example or something that would
yeah,
tie into what was happening in the
yeah.
magazine.
I'm glad you brought that up because it hadn't occurred to me that that was kind of a precursor to the Dungeon Master experience. Um, the cool thing about the Dungeon Master experience, it was regular, so you could actually
Right.
anticipate. Um,
Um, so let's go back. So you said you were starting to write, and some of it eventually got published. What was it that how did you make that leap to being published?
uh, uh, with dogged determination, because it was really the editors who worked on the magazines back when I was just starting to contribute were Roger Moore,
Mm-hmm.
no relation to the actor, Barbara Young.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they were the first two. They gave me a lot of coaching because I would turn over pitches or ideas, and they'd very kindly steer me away from that and inspire me to try again. And the whole trick was trying to figure out what it is they were looking for. Once I cracked that nut, and started to send them started to get a sense for what they liked and what they didn't,
Yeah.
um, I found success really quickly. And I would send an article in, and sometimes they'd go, this is great, but it's too long, make it shorter, or this is okay, but it needs this or that or the other thing. Or um, and I got a lot of really, really good educational feedback. This is like I was a know nothing, right? I had no knowledge really of publishing. And so I was just looking for a window into a wider world.
Right.
And they were very kind enough to sort of help me along. And so, like, the first couple of years was me just sort of getting a handle on what could work and what obviously didn't work, getting very kind rejection letters, and trying never to make the same mistake twice. Um,
It's. I
and
mean,
eventually,
go ahead.
sorry, and just trying to understand what it means to be a professional in the industry, and
Michelle Michelle
knowing that you're not
Vukovich.
writing for yourself, you're writing for somebody else. And so you
Right.
have to give them what they want. You have to give them what they want when they ask for it, in the format that they want, on time and to spec. And so that's a skill
Yeah.
that you pick up. I picked it up pretty quickly. And then suddenly I'm like just churning out stuff. And suddenly they're coming to me and saying, could you write this? Could you write that? Could you give us this? Could you give us that? We need a Planescape adventure because we got this new setting coming out. It's like, yes, 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 I will do that. I will do that. I will do exactly what you tell me. And then, because I was also teaching, I took a summer off and went down to Lake Geneva. And I knocked
So
on the door, basically knocked on the door and said, hey, you know me. You need any help? And they're like, yeah, we got a stack of submissions about the size of two Sasquatches. Can you please help us whittle this down and get our submission stack under control? And that was hugely important because now to them, I'm actually a physical three-dimensional human being that they can interact with, not
right.
some Canadian guy on a phone.
So Michelle Vukovich has joined the chat here, and she says that your adventures for Dungeon were always a little bit long.
Yes, they were. And I got some great advice from, hello, Michelle. My God, it has been a long time. And uh, that was always a challenge with me. I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was you, Michelle. It might have been Wolf, or it could have been Dave, or probably Barbara. Uh, I'd send in something that was 19,000, 20,000 words. And they're like, no. We like this idea, but you've got to knock it down to 10,000 words or 12,000 words before we'll even um, uh, do anything. And yes, I do look the same, Michelle, because I am, in fact, a robot.
I think you bring up a good point, which I know I've certainly sat on panels with you at conventions and online chats where we talk about if people ask how do you get into the business, and the one of the things you just said, which is super important, is to remember that you need to be the answer to what they're looking for, right? If they tell you to do something, don't just make the change. Hear what they're saying, and the next time you pitch, remember that and apply it to what you're doing.
Yes, yes. And the other thing I tell people is, no matter how much you learn about how I got into it, everybody's path is different. You've got to
Yeah,
cut your own way through the fields, basically. Um, the route that I took to get into the industry just doesn't exist anymore. That road is completely grown over with, you know, weeds. It's gone. you do have to find your own way.
Um, so I do love the idea that you just came down to Lake Geneva on your own and said, "I'm here."
Yeah, it
How
wasn't
was it?
that far. I was working just outside of Toronto. It's just a short drive down southern Ontario through Detroit and up through Chicago to get there. And honestly, it was a dream just to sort of visit Lake Geneva and soak in the whatever it is that was there at the time. Um, yeah, and it was it was illuminating because you have in your mind sort of an image of what TSR was. In fact, I remember in Dragon Magazine, maybe it was the Wormy cartoon, where I can't remember the artist who illustrated TSR as a big giant die.
Phil Folio.
Thank you, Phil
That's
Folio.
part
Yes,
of it's a
and
Phil and Dixie. Yeah.
yeah, for some reason that image stuck in my head. Like, of course, yeah, that would be great if TSR actually worked out of a big giant die.
Yes.
And then you
I
get
see
to the factory, and you're like,
a lot of us who were disappointed when it turned out not to be.
yeah, yeah. And so uh, I had to sort of overcome my disappointment when I saw the outside face of the TSR building. But once I got inside and I realized just what a maze of corridors it is, and they've got like the periodicals sequestered off in this one part of the building, and they've got that kind of thing. It was fun. It felt like everybody was working out of a garage.
um, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. So how did you go from being the Canadian guy that showed up one summer to working for the company?
Well, that's a great story. So Michelle, who is in the chat now, um, she was the editor of Dungeon Magazine at TSR at the time of the buyout, when Wizards bought the company, and um, Michelle not going to Seattle meant that there was a vacancy on the periodicals team, and Pierce Waters, who was managing the periodical staff at the time, knew me, liked me, and thought I had the um, passion and ability to step into that role on the um, on the Seattle front. So he called me and said, "Would you be interested in um, not writing for the magazines anymore, but actually helping us run them?" That was an easy question to answer.
But it wasn't an easy step to do that because, as you say, you were Canadian and you needed a
Yes,
visa.
that's right. And that turned out to be a little bit of tricky business, and it really had nothing to do with. Um, I think it had mostly to do with fish, uh, because yes, fish, Stan. I blame the fish.
Okay.
Um, so so it's not hard to get an H-1B visa or whatever they're called if you have an actual position down there, and the job is very unusual. It's not like anybody in America can just run a D&D magazine. It's a very niche kind of thing. So it wasn't hard to get the paperwork set up. But when I got to the border, and this was out in Vancouver, I drove out west and then drove south. I had some issues with the border crossing guards. It was during the salmon fishing war of 1997 when Canada and the United States were sort of, well, they were pissed off about fishing going on, salmon fishing going on, and uh, tensions were a little high, and so the border guards were denying me access and accusing me of having false paperwork, because they were upset about the fish. And so it took me 3 tries to get across the border, before they actually believed that I was who I said I was, that Wizards of the Coast was a real place, and that the job was actually a real job. And I do remember when I finally did get across the border, the one thing the border guard said to me, the parting shot was, he said, looking at my paperwork, is this all that you make?
Is this all that you make? Wow.
Because it will
Wow.
surprise nobody. It will surprise nobody that role playing games not the highest paying industry out there. But yeah, it was pretty insulting to be told by a border guard that I
That's
make next to nothing.
oh. Well, yeah, no one gets into this business to make a killing. In fact,
Right.
too many people
Yeah.
stay here to our own detriment for love of the game.
Yes. And so that was in 1997, and I've been at Wizards ever since. But like you said at the top of this, I've held many jobs in Wizards over the years, migrating from the periodicals team to the R&D game design team,
Right.
and
So,
then from there, just wearing an.
Michael Michael Pastor has sent in some questions that which I've been kind of picking from. One of them was how many. He asked how many articles you published before you got hired on. Do you know roughly?
I want to say about 30.
About 30?
Yeah,
And were they mostly adventures or
mostly yes. Yeah,
um,
yeah. They were. I could crank them out pretty fast. Now I probably wrote at least twice that because a number of them were rejected for various legitimate reasons. Um, but I was undeterred. I adventure writing is like my jam.
yes.
Um, it I didn't feel like I was ever wasting my time doing that work. I loved designing adventures, and I loved Dungeon Magazine.
I remember during that time before you got hired, when I came on and started, because I certainly read Dragon and Dungeon magazine before I got hired, but I wasn't a subscriber. I didn't read every issue. When I got on and I was able to get every issue as it came out and a bunch of the back issues, I started noticing this Perkins guy who was in every issue, and there was like this run where every issue had a Perkins adventure in it. So
Yeah.
when one of
Again, living up in Canada, nothing to do. I drove my parents when I was living at home because I had my first adventure published when I was 18. So I was pretty young and I was still living at home at that time. And I was back then, no computer. It was all on a typewriter.
right,
So I owe my parents a debt of thanks because an entire summer was just clickety clackety clickety clackety 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 of this old typewriter. Thinking back on it, using a typewriter was such a trial because if there were revisions to make, you had to basically type it all again. Um,
yeah, no mistakes were a very real stumbling block.
yes,
Typos.
yeah, I had it in when I had my first article published back in '86. Um, I don't think I even had an electric typewriter until 1994, and I didn't get a computer until just before I joined Wizards of the Coast, so
Wow.
1997. So, yeah.
Um, all right. So another question that Michael had asked that you and I actually just talked about at lunch the other day is how we first met. When we first met, and I think we decided that there's for all the things in my life that have good stories, there's not a good story about that.
No, and I actually, I don't actually remember the first meeting.
Yeah. No.
I remember we suddenly started to see a lot of each other uh, around the time that um, I joined Wizards, but we met, I'm sure,
Yeah.
at TSR Sheridan Springs facility at least once, possibly more.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny. I remember with crystal clarity meeting other people at the Sheridan Springs building. Like I remember exactly the first time I met Jeff Grubb, and that was walking into the building. He was coming out, um, and he said something really funny, which I won't share here because it's also not appropriate. And I remember the first time I met Monty because he was sitting in Michelle Vukovic's office writing her a note when she wasn't there. And I remember people like the first time I met Keith Strom, and I remember the first time I met Cindy Rice. But you, Stan, I don't remember the exact first time you and
Yeah,
I met
I
face
don't
to
either.
face.
But I agree. Agree. It was almost certainly when we for sure ran into each other, such that the reason I think that is I don't have a clear memory of meeting you at Wizards. I just have a memory of seeing you and go, Chris. So we were acquainted somehow.
Yes, somehow. Yes.
um,
Yeah.
so you came over and you worked on just now. I'm just looking at the time because, as I was saying before we started, this hour is flying by, and don't want to get too. I want to come a bit to the future, not get stuck in the past for the whole of the conversation. So you
Sure
worked
thing.
on the magazines. How did you make the switch over to coming from the periodicals department into the R&D mainstream, as it were?
Oh, that's a good question. So, because the periodicals team always was and always will be scrappy, we had a pretty small staff. I was, and Michelle will be able to relate to this. I was the editor of Dungeon, but I was also the associate editor of Dragon Magazine. So you're kind of doing both, juggling both magazines
Mm.
um, to an extent. And then uh, Johnny Wilson, the publisher at Wizards at the time, got the rights to do Star Wars magazines. So suddenly we picked up Star Wars Gamer and Star Wars Insider, and I was the also the editor of Star Wars Gamer, and I was also the associate editor of Star Wars Insider, which our friend Jeff Grubb, or sorry, Jeff Grubb, not Jeff Quick, um,
Hmm.
edited for a while. And 4 magazines was a lot
Yes.
to do, and I was getting burned out on the magazines, and I was also a little troubled by the fact that I couldn't give because I was being pulled in 4 different directions. It was hard to give Dragon and Dungeon as much attention as I wanted to. Um, the Star Wars magazines were great and they were fun to work on, and actually Lucas licensing was lovely to deal with, but it was just too much, and I was getting overwhelmed, and so I actually thought about leaving Wizards of the Coast around that time, and Bill Slavosek, who was the director of R&D creative, caught a whiff of that and came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to? We have a vacancy on our team. I'd like for you to consider filling that." And so I interviewed with Bill and Ted Stark, and others just to see if this would be a good fit for the team. And I ended up migrating to there, which turned out to be the smartest move for me, probably because within months, Johnny Wilson spun the periodicals off into what later became Paizo Publishing.
Hmm.
And so the magazines left Wizards, and I would have had to have left with them if I had still been on that team.
Which I mean, the, Bill certainly knew at the time that he made you that he approached you about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that. I mean, I don't know if you guys knew it as early as we did because I was a creative director by that point. But we knew that spinoff was coming a long time before it was announced because the company just was losing its interest in doing that.
Yeah, with Wizards, it's always been sort of a thing that um, magazines is just a strange business, and it wasn't like anything else that Wizards was overseeing. It wasn't like the novels. It wasn't like cards. It wasn't like anything. Um, and so it was just so kind of alien to the Wizards mindset that Wizards was looking very hard at getting rid of it somehow, either just killing the magazines or finding some other solution. Um, but as happens, sometimes the people closest to the thing being
Yeah.
affected are the least informed about what's going on with that thing.
Right.
And so I think that you may have had more information, and Bill may have had more information than even I did working on the magazines.
So when you came over, what were you working on?
Star Wars and other miscellaneous non D&D role playing games that we were invested in, but Star Wars was the biggie,
um,
and that was super. Because I used to have Star Wars wallpaper on my wall when I was a kid, so Star Wars pretty cool.
Star Wars is pretty cool. It continues
Yeah,
to be.
indeed. And
Um,
actually, I've throughout my time at Wizards, I've often been hitched to the Star Wars wagon. In addition to working on the Star Wars RPG that was created in the early 2000s, I was also part of the Star Wars Saga Edition and part of the Star Wars Miniatures line, overseeing those at various times.
uh, and yet, now again, I'm trying to condense a whole lot. Really, what I'm thinking is I want to have you in for three more conversations, but on this one, uh, how is it that you then jumped over and right now you're the creative director for D&D, among other things. You
Correct.
uh, what? How is it that you made the leap to not even? What's the path that led to you being the the manager of record?
Um, it's time served, I guess, is the short answer. This is my 28th year at Wizards of the Coast, and uh, I was I was one of the creative directors working on D&D during the third edition era. I
Mm-hmm.
was a design manager of D&D during the fourth edition era, and then the fifth edition era, I was one of the lead designers. Um, and so you and having worked on first edition and second edition too, with on the magazines and in early Wizards days, I basically had a knowledge of multiple editions of the game, a lot of institutional knowledge that just made me an obvious choice to sit in that seat. Um, and um, but I think the single most important thing is the being so invested in the relaunch of fifth edition, being involved in the fifth edition design. That's probably the thing that ultimately got me where I am right
Yeah.
now.
So you were involved in third edition, 3.5, fourth edition, fifth
Yeah.
edition. The fifth edition revisions. You've had your hands in
Mhm.
a number of the
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
uh, most of the modern iterations of the core
Yeah.
rules. Um, there's a lot of fans. Well, there's a tendency among the fan base to get very uh, possessional of one or another set of those rules as their favorite. I know as someone who's worked on multiple that usually doesn't happen, but but when you think about the different editions, how do you compare them in your head? What
Oh gosh, that's a really good question.
I try.
So yeah, I think we can go. Might be better to go backward on this one. So
Sure.
fifth edition was, I think, one of the guiding principles of fifth edition is what was so great about all the other editions, and what do we keep from all of those editions and incorporate into fifth edition's DNA. Um, and basically, what are the lessons of the past, and what has resonated with people in previous editions, because we really wanted fifth edition to be uh, kind of like a love letter to D&D all up.
Right.
And one of the things we did early in fifth edition was we played all of the previous editions. Like we ran a short first edition campaign, a short second edition campaign, a short third edition campaign, blah, 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 to basically remind ourselves about what was cool about those editions. Like At Will Powers, that fourth edition kind of doubled down on, was like, okay, that's sort of one of the things that people really liked about fourth edition. So we should find a way to incorporate that into fifth edition. So I think part of the reason why fifth edition exploded, apart from some reasons having to do with technology and streaming and everything, is just that it tried to and succeeded at incorporating the best parts of D&D throughout its entire legacy. Not everything, because everybody's got their
Right.
their pet favorites and things, but I think it did a really good job of hitting the important things and also just listening to the fans and having an entire team essentially dedicated to obtaining and processing fan feedback on the edition. That's sort of the defining traits of fifth edition. Fourth edition was an answer to a question about how do we make a game that resonates with video gamers. Fourth edition was us thinking, okay, video games have based there are a whole bunch of video games that have basically stolen D&D's tech, hit points, armor class, blah
Right.
blah 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 blah, and we've got games like WoW and things like that that are basically gobbling up people's entertainment time. How do we get some of those people back into playing role-playing games? And so fourth edition was an attempt to design a game that would attract digital game players. In a way, it sort of reversed. It was, for years, video games had been kind of borrowing D&D. Now we were borrowing some lessons from video games, and so that was a wild experiment. And although it didn't actually succeed, I think ultimately one must admire the audacity of what fourth edition was trying to do, given the game's history. Third edition, I think, and people like Monty Cook probably speak better to this than I can, or Jonathan Tweed. But I think third edition was, first of all, it was an attempt to create a version of D&D that felt right for Wizards. A new company, new corporate overlords. Let's have a game that's going to reignite the D&D audience and really have a Wizards footprint on it. But I think also it was, okay, first and second edition may have been a little loosey-goosey with a few things. Let's try to nail down or button down some of that loosey-goosiness.
Right.
Like just playing and sort of leaning into some modern game sensibilities. Like, wouldn't it be nice if rolling high was always cool? You know, that
Nice.
was new. That was sort of one of third edition's big sort of
Yeah.
aha moments. Is rolling high always cool? You'll always feel good about rolling a 20, and you'll always feel bad about rolling a 1. And that I think was part of what third edition brought to the table. But there are things I often say that in many ways, fifth edition's most direct ancestor is second edition, because I think fifth edition has some of the things that second edition had, which was ease of play at the table. It was easy to run games, something that actually I think third and fourth edition lost or sacrificed. There was
I would say I always thought, and I remember there were a lot of debate about this at the time. There was a point where third edition could have gone that route, um, but
Yeah.
and it was right around the time when we were starting to do supplemental material, and we were noticing that even our internal people were getting stat blocks that were not 100% correct, which is the
Right.
impetus for the conversation. And the two, it wasn't really a fight, but the two sides it broke down to were the side that were like, well, it doesn't have to be 100%. We want it to be good. We got this thing that you can roll with, and the other side of, no, we put this thing together. We need to make it work so everyone can see how it can work. And I don't. I have an opinion, but I don't think one side is right and wrong. But we definitely came down on that second side, and the whole thing went down that very exacting road because of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, design philosophies have to kind of change with the times and have to be in step with what the audience is willing to accept. Um, but you know, working on fifth edition and even fourth edition and third edition, I missed the ability to create a character in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, like just write down your ability scores, blah, 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 blah. Boom, let's start playing.
Yeah.
That vanished for years. Being able to create a statistically sound monster easily and quickly was not something that was high on third editions or like fourth edition's priority list.
Yeah.
And we've tried to take strides in fifth edition to reduce the time it takes to make a character, to reduce the time it takes to create a monster, or play a monster or run a monster. And so
I think that it falls into a version of the I'm sorry I wrote a long letter, but I didn't have time to write a short one. Right? That in order to get that simplicity, you've got to have the complexity to be whittled away.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, every edition will have its warts and its beauty. And I think I've been fortunate to be in a position where I can study that and watch how the audience sort of evolves and changes and has sort of new demands and new expectations. One of the most fun things to do is to put something out into the world in an Unearthed Arcana article that's kind of, we know it's going to rile up some of the fan base, but we do it anyway because we're gauging, are they looking for a change? Are they ready for a change? Do they want to change? Has their positions changed on how they sort of see how the rules work? And oftentimes we're proven wrong, or we've proven that we're moving faster than our audience is willing to let us move, or we're moving slower than they want us to move. It's always a moving target, and that's part of the fun of the game.
All right, I'm going to pause here for a second and say I'm done drawing for now. So as will often happen, those who watch know I get started and then I finish up the drawing off screen. If you
That's
are a
amazing.
subscriber to our free newsletter, which I'll bring up here, free newsletter at 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com, you'll be the first one to see the finished version of this. I'm getting caught up on the ones from the tail end of last year. A new one is getting released this week, and probably another new one either the end of this week or beginning of next as I do the finishes. But this is, I think this is turning out all right. We're doing okay for Mordenkainen and that horrible astral dreadnought about to crush him to death.
Yes. The Astro Dreadnought, that was on the first edition manual of the planes.
Yes, it was.
That was an easily painting, I think, right?
So, yes, it definitely was. All right, so we'll pull that down. Bring up just you and me again. I tell you, one of the things I've liked about fifth edition from the beginning, and it goes along with what you were saying, is I think you can see the bones of the past editions there, and you can dial it up. You can dial up the parts you like and dial down the parts you didn't like, and it does feel like a game that is aware of its ancestry.
Yeah, and one of the amazing things about D&D, and it never ceases to amaze me, is that it gives you license to basically ignore the rules and make your own. It is a game about being creative,
Yeah,
and about making your own stuff. And often when we as creatives are challenged within the corporate environment of wizards, it's because there's a breakdown between the understanding that we're making a game that encourages other people to make their own stuff.
right.
That means what we sell has to have a perceived value beyond that. And we should never try to take away that creative space for the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's important. That's vital. That's baked into the DNA of the game. And when we get into
So
trouble, is when we think that that's not important.
I think that, and I've worked at Wizards was not the only corporate place I've worked that's done role playing games, and everywhere I've worked, the business people always have a hard time with that concept, understanding that a key part of this game
Right.
you never will hold.
Yes.
It lives out there, and if you do somehow capture it, your audience is going to wander off somewhere else and do something else.
Yeah.
So I got a few other questions. Oh, you know what I wanted to talk about? I used this in my write up for this, and Michael Pastor again in the questions he sent in asked about. He says, "Is Chris really the wizard of live play streaming? like I gave you credit for?" And I make the argument that the answer is pretty much yes, but uh, what do you what do you think about uh, that?
Oh, okay. So for me, it started with the Acquisition Sync podcasts, which
Yeah,
I believe began in 2007.
yeah,
Um,
2007,
at that time, there were no streamed role playing game shows around.
right?
Um,
And you
and
did that, if I remember, because the live ones were so popular,
well, the
right?
live ones came later. So the podcast came first.
Did it? Oh,
Jerry Holkins came to us and said, "Hey, I want to get my friend Mike to play D&D. Can you run a game for us and we'll podcast it?" And I'm like, that sounds stupid. Nobody's going to listen to us play D&D. Who wants to listen to other people play D&D? That sounds crazy. But we did it. It was immensely popular. We did a few more, and then that spawned live games in 2008. And again, I thought it was silly. Nobody's going to want to watch other people play D&D when they can play themselves, but I was wrong again. And at that time, there was nothing else like it. Um, so yeah, I guess you could say that in a way.
I know I know it's not the kind of thing that you are likely to pin on your chest, but
Oh no, it is quite likely that after I have left this terrestrial sphere, that the things I will be remembered for, the top three things, one of them is going to be Acquisitions Inc.
yeah,
No question.
and
The other one's probably going to be voicing characters on Critical Role, and then the third one, I don't know what it's going to be.
um, but I think that there is a very strong, very strong argument that the modern live stream milieu that exists grew directly out of that. That it wasn't it. They might have gotten to it eventually, but that's the path that led up to that.
Yeah,
Um,
but prove us wrong, kids.
that's right. So you did that, and then you did the dice action. No, what was it?
Ice camera action. Yes,
Dice camera action.
that was an unscripted streaming show that we were hosting ourselves. Very low budget, um, but it's how I met my current play group, my current players. It was magical. I love that show.
That was a great show. I listened to it every week. I used to. I don't know if you remember. I used to doodle along with it and leave the drawings on your desk
Yeah.
occasionally of what had
It was
happened.
it was so low budget that we had to really scrape to get the little sort of animated credits at the front, and then I had to do the lyrics and the music myself, and sing the song. And there's just no money uh, for that kind of thing.
Let's see what other
But
questions.
that's the business in a nutshell, right?
Yeah,
Um,
come on, let's put on a show.
you get two band-aids and this little length of rope. Go make a show.
Did you know that if you take a band aid and you pull it apart quickly, it creates a little glow? Like The same kind of thing you get from wintergreens if you chop them in the dark.
Really?
I didn't know that either. I found that out today.
Hmm. I
Things you
have not
find
seen
out.
any evidence of this, Stan. I don't know where you're getting your news.
There was some science podcast, and someone sent that question in, and the person showed a video and explained why. And
Do you believe in
I was
ghosts, Stan?
no. Let's see other quick questions we got here. Uh, do you remember were any of the literary influences from the old Appendix N big influences on you?
No, Tolkien is shit. I mean, no, I'm kidding. um, yes, sure, absolutely. And when I had the old, I guess it was Dungeon Master's Guide, that actually got me to go to a library to get those books because I didn't know what three-quarters of them were. Three Hearts and Three Lions, and
Right.
yeah, I hadn't even read Lovecraft at that point. It's like Lovecraft is all over
Right.
first edition. So yeah, very inspirational. I'm trying to think if there probably was no singular source, like literary source, that's inspired my work. I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Would you think that is? I mean, if it's certainly, it might. A lot of people would say Tolkien. I mean, but what of the even we're not looking at I know this is a terrible question because I can't finish the sentence. Uh, look at the D&D products and the novels. When you started writing ones for yourself, what were the ones that you hoped you could emulate or that you were comparing yourself against?
Oh gosh. So my my passion for adventure design stems from me as a young person buying all of these, little modules that came out in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
Like I, like anybody who wanted to be good at something, I digested these things. Like I just inhaled them, read them, studied them, deconstructed them. I used to actually make my own adventure module covers out of construction paper and illustrate the outsides and put the maps on the inside and make
Mm-hmm.
the little booklets inside. I just, I, all of these classic modules in some way, shape, or form have shaped my sensibilities as an
Right.
adventure designer. Uh, when it comes to games more broadly, um, a lot of my D&D work is shaped by the D&D work of the stewards of the game who came before.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah.
Um, if you could, if you could just take any of the old games or settings from the TSR archive and say that we're bringing that back tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh, we've already done a lot of that, Stan.
I know. Well, I mean, there's the ones
Always,
that have gone through, but this is forgetting having to
okay.
sales or whatever. You can.
Hang on, my dog is having trouble leaping up into my lap. He's trying, and he
He's
keeps
coming back for the end
half
of the
falling off.
show.
I think he's given up. Come here, buddy. Um, so if I had to bring one back like tomorrow,
Yeah, if you could, yeah. What?
so
So I mean, we can get outside of D&D if it was
I
gangbusters and
would, I would, I
Godwink.
would, I would get into a license with Hanna-Barbera so we could do the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh with Scooby-Doo characters.
Ooh, I like
That's not
that.
beyond the pale, by the way.
Well,
D and D is
certainly.
D and D is so D and D is very, very popular right now, and a lot of people would like to do fun things with us, and that's the first thing that leapt in my brain.
That would be
A
great.
few, yeah, people don't know, but sometimes I run a game, like a special one-off game that's Scooby-Doo and Castle Ravenloft. But I think actually the Sinister Secret of Salt Marsh is more in the vein of Scooby-Doo.
Uh, it, that's a good mix. I like
Yeah,
it. Um, all right, so we're at 7:15. We're about time to begin wrapping this up. Again, I could keep talking with you for hours, as you know, as our lunches sometimes drag on a bit. But
yeah. Chris in chat asked the question: what would Chris's dream project be in the future to work on? I've been giving that some thought. Um, I'd like to work on a D&D movie script
you know what? You
or a
have in the
D&D television
past. I've
script.
I've read some of the
Yeah,
scripts that you worked on just for
yeah,
your own entertainment, and I'd like you to write a D&D script too.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've consulted on some script stuff in the past, including the recent uh, Paramount movie, but I think it would just be fun. Um, I found that script writing is a lot like adventure writing because it's very templated and it's got a structure that's unique that you kind of have to learn and internalize in order to deliver the
Yeah,
expected outcome.
yeah,
And it's got constraints. And I always like having uh, a project that has structural constraints.
creative, creative strictures.
Yes, exactly. And
Doran
then
says
finding ways to cavalierly break them when it suits me. But
Doran says he'll storyboard your movie script. So there you got that going
oh,
for
sweet. Yes, that would be awesome.
you. So before we go, uh, the impetus for starting the show is the fact that 2024 was the 50th anniversary, and as
Yeah.
you were saying, I don't remember this was while we were recording, before we were recording, but half your life has been working at Wizards or on D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we may not have another half life to go, but going forward, what do you see? What do you see in the future for D&D from where we've gotten? Now I know some being on staff makes it more difficult for you to. There are
Right.
things you know are going to happen that you can't talk about. So
Yes.
putting that
Yes.
off the board, kind of looking big picture, what do you think the the game and the broader hobby have coming?
Yeah. So I'm not sure I can speak intelligently about the broader hobby. I don't even after 28 years, I'm not sure I fully understand the role playing game hobby. But I think that D&D, the awareness of D&D in the world is very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that means that I think that the audience is going to continue to grow and expand beyond uh, in, and capture uh, uh, a lot more imaginations and a lot more people. And so it's going to be, I think, I suspect we'll see in the next 10, 15, 20 years, more expressions of D&D. Uh, what the company is doing now and what I think is probably the right direction is making sure that you can experience D&D in all sorts of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in addition to the role playing game, but also even within the role playing game, having different ways to play, acknowledging that there are some people they're waiting for the next Baldur's Gate game, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how they'll experience D&D. And so we want that to be a continuing. I think that's a good direction for D&D to go. But I also think there's no limit to the stories we can tell using D&D as a platform. And so we'll just see more stories, more. I think we'll see more. I don't want to say risky products, but more products that kind of test people's thoughts of what a D&D product could be. Um, I think there'll be a greater sense of daring when it comes to exploring different SKUs, product types, things like that. Now we're just over 10 years into the life of 5th edition, and with the this is usually the time when we get more experimental,
right?
And I think that one of the keys to future success, though, is making the game accessible to young people. And so I think we're going to see a lot more attempts to release products that are tailored to younger audiences, which isn't bad. I mean, this is not new. D&D
Right.
has done this many, many times. And we're likely to see some fun crossover experimental stuff, I suspect. Magic has had a tremendous amount of success with their Universes Beyond.
Right.
I think it goes without saying that D&D might dip its toes into the idea of mashing with some other brand or entertainment property and seeing what happens. Certainly, I think there's an appetite for it outside of Wizards.
Yes, Michael says including coloring books.
I love
coloring
books. Yes,
It's tough
and anybody who's I don't keep up on all of our licensing efforts, but I am sort of surprised at some of the licensed products that we're seeing now. Sort of hearken to the days of TSR when you started to see D&D popping up in all sorts of weird, wonderful ways. Like, here's the book of D&D drinks, like alcoholic beverages. Okay, great. Somebody will buy that, particularly in this political climate. And
it's a strange. I mean, it's a strange tension for
yes,
D&D between for the the hardcore fan, and even hardcore is a phrase that makes has its own problem. But the hardcore fan seeing anything that is for a new audience or that goes beyond them as being something they didn't get. And the tension is between making sure that your existing very fanatical fan base has material for them to use, but getting them to understand that everything that comes out doesn't need to be for them.
yeah, I see that tension occasionally, but I also know that D&D is now a multi-generational game. That hardcore players are teaching their kids D&D.
Yeah.
And they want their kids to have the D&D bugbear dice bag or whatever. That's not cutting into their.
Well, I mean,
but on the role playing side, yes, we want to make sure that I think the key to success is not to make anybody feel like D&D was for them and it's not anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So before we wrap up, is there anything you wish I'd asked you about that I didn't?
No, but if something occurs to me, Stan, we can do this again because I like watching you draw pretty pictures.
Well, you know what? Anything that'll get you back, I'll keep doing it.
I'm frankly in awe. It's like watching somebody play an instrument that you'll never be able to master.
The beauty and the secret of this is, because anyone who's done anything with me where I'm drawing, is if I'm coming up with something out of my head, I can't have a sensible conversation and have original thoughts. But if I'm doing my interpretation of something, that's something that I can flow. I don't have to engage the part of my brain which is conversational, so I can do that at the same time that we talk. So as long as there's good stuff out there for me to homage, I'll keep having people on and having conversations.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for hosting this show, Stan. This has been a real treat. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in and folks that I haven't seen in ages. I hope we find an opportunity to, connect again.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on. I know that you got a lot going on, and I appreciate you taking some time out to do this.
Yeah, this has been great.
All right, hang on. I'll do a quick outro, and you and I can make our friendly farewells. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
There we go. That was my conversation with Chris Perkins. Like I was saying to him, there's the list of things that we could talk about was so long. We hit on a few of them, and they each opened up into more. So there's lots of stuff I wanted to talk to him about. More about his time on the magazines. Some more about running the well, the third edition adventure that I got to play and we talked about, but also running the live games and what that was like. I'd really like to talk more about that with Chris, and certainly there will be the opportunity for you all to send questions in the next time he's in too. Remember that if you subscribe to the free newsletter, I love saying free newsletter, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com, you will be able to send your questions in ahead of time, like Michael J. Pastor did. Get them on the list for the conversation. You'll also be the first people to see the finished art when it's done, and get other behind the scenes bits of information. So sign up for free. I would love it if you would. Also, as you will hear any host on any YouTube podcast say, hey, how about if you go and give it a like, give it a thumbs up, give it a heart, whatever platform you're watching on, that helps to spread the information about the show. I mean, it makes me feel good when someone says they like it, but the main thing it does is it tells the algorithm that the show is something you liked enough to interact with, and so they suggest it to more people, which brings more people to come join us in future shows. So I'd really appreciate it if you did that. And if you're watching on replay, hey, leave me a comment. Tell me, say that you liked it, or that you want to talk to Chris later on, or I don't know, whatever. T- tell me something. Tell me about your dog. We got to see Milo. Tell me about your dog. It is another thing that just helps with the algorithm, with the sharing. So please do that. I will be back tomorrow night with another episode of my Random Encounter show where I do improv cartooning. And then I'll be back next week with another episode here of 50 Years in the Dungeon as we close in on the last couple of years of the half century. And there'll be someone else interesting chatting here. I don't know who it is right now, but I guarantee you it'll be someone fun. So please come on back. In the meantime, whether you're live, whether you're watching on replay, I really appreciate you being here. And I look forward to chatting with you again in the future. Come on back. Till then, take care, everyone. Bye.